In a few hours' time, Chileans will start heading to the polls, and it looks like former President Michelle Bachelet will return to power. Almost all of the candidates running for office are campaigning on the same platform, the reduction of inequality and better access to health and education. Lucia Newman tells us what sets them apart.
At Santiago's fish market, the wide variety of seafood is overwhelming. Almost as overwhelming as the unprecedented number of candidates to choose from in this presidential election. There are 9 of them, says this voter. They include 3 women, independents, candidates from the far left to the far right. In the lead, 2 women with a shared history. Michelle Bachelet and Evelyn Matei grew up together. Their fathers, both Air Force generals, were close friends until a military coup divided their families and Chile. One, Matei, joined the dictatorship. The other, Bachelet, died at the hands of it.
Even though we did have a childhood that we share, we represent 2 different projects of country, of society.
The former socialist president has a double-digit lead over her conservative rival. The only candidate who believes Chile does not need major reforms.
La reforma tributaria.
The new tax reform my adversary is proposing will ruin us, she told business leaders. But the demands of the street, from free quality education to a new constitution to replace the one left by the former dictatorship, have dramatically changed the nation's political agenda. Chile's current constitution does not allow the government to unilaterally call a referendum. And so, to try to prove that the public really does support a new constitution, an unprecedented movement is underway, calling for voters to mark the top right-hand corner of their ballots with the letters AC, which stand for Constitutional Assembly. Bachelet, who will almost certainly win, proposes a new constitution and higher corporate taxes to finance free education, public health and pension funds. But another candidate, Marco Enriquez Ominami, who came in a close third in the last presidential election, says Bachelet's generation of politicians won't deliver.
When she was president, she and her team blocked the vast majority of the reforms she proposes today. Why? Because her generation was traumatized by the coup. They are held back by fear of confrontation.
That's led to widespread disenchantment with Chile's political leadership. So, perhaps the biggest uncertainty is how many people will actually participate in this presidential election, in which, for the first time, voting is not mandatory. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, Santiago.
Well, Chile is considered one of South America's most stable and prosperous nations. It is the world's biggest producer of metals and copper and has been the springboard of the country's recent economic success. Chile has the best GDP per capita in Latin America, but half of the nation's 17 million people make less than $500 per month. Despite this, almost 95% of people are employed. In 2010, Chile became the first South American country to join the mainly Western Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Eric Farnsworth is Vice President for Council of the Americas. He joins us live now from Washington, D.C. to talk more about this. First of all, if the polls are to be believed and Michelle Bachelet does win this election, what sort of leadership will she bring to Chile, bearing in mind, of course, that this would be her second stint as president?
Well, I think that's exactly right. She'll bring stable leadership, well-known leadership. She left office the last time highly popular, and I think she'll try to pick up where she left off. She has laid out an agenda which is broadly centrist, but it does have some redistributive qualities in terms of higher taxes on some and new social spending for others. So I think she'll be headed in that direction. But I think her leadership will be quite stable and quite centrist.
I want to pick up on one of the comments that one of her presidential rivals, candidates, made there in Lucia's report, that her generation talks a good game, but in terms of actually implementing many of the reforms that they talk about, that there is a fear of not wanting to take that next step. Is that a legitimate criticism?
Well, I think it's a legitimate criticism for a candidate who's running against her for president, no question about it. And it is interesting, since she was president last time, over the last 4 years, you have seen a student movement arise that's been quite loud and has won some successes from the government, and in fact has inserted itself into her platform. And also she has expanded her coalition to include some of the student leaders and others. So it is a younger generation of folks who are coming up. And so even though she was president before, she is going to have to respond to others. And I think there's a really interesting point here, and that is that Chilean democracy in the modern era has only been around for 23 years. But if you look at that from the perspective of voters, many voters in Chile today have no particular recollection of the dictatorship, and so they're not looking to relitigate that or refight it or to try to settle scores. They're looking to the future, and they want to see better education, they want to see better health care, and they want to see an economy that's growing and isn't just dependent on copper or on metals, but is adding value, is built on innovation. They're looking to the future.
There's talk as well about the potential of voter apathy here, given that this is the first election where voting is not mandatory. How much of a factor could voter turnout be here?
Well, I think it's going to be a huge factor. As the report indicated, it's quite likely that Michelle Bachelet will be reelected. I think the main question outstanding is whether she will have to go to a second round in December or if she'll be elected straight out tomorrow. And that's going to be dependent on voter turnout. If a lot of people think that she's already going to be elected, they might think, well, why bother? I don't have to go to the polls. My vote's not going to count anyway. And if that's the case, then it's possible that the opposition votes might actually come in higher percentage-wise than have been anticipated, and that could kick it to a second round. This is the first time where Chilean citizens are voting since the dictatorship that they're not required to vote. So this is actually a bit of a wild card. We don't actually know what the turnout will be, but it's certainly something that could impact whether the election goes to a second round in December.
Indeed, we'll wait to see what happens. Good to get your thoughts on this. Eric Farnsworth from the Council of the Americas in Washington. Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much.